And look, if I'm honest, while some of the best, greatest, most joy-filled people I've ever met in my life are in the church, if I'm honest, I can also say some of the meanest, cruelest people are the ones who wore the t-shirt. The ones who had the bumper sticker. There's the ones who are blaring K-Love all the time, and we can wrestle with this gap and nothing against K-Love, by the way, so that's a great thing. But we can create this gap, and there ends up being this struggle to reconcile how people who are supposed to have the most joy seem to have the most bitterness. Those who are supposed to have the most love are filled with the most hate. And it creates this disconnect. It creates this gap, and it can create doubt. And by the way, real quick side note here too. If that's what it is for you, if you struggle, hey, listen, I'd love to take that step across the line when it comes to faith, but man, I just, I got hurt in church. Someone did this. Someone said this to me. Hey, listen, can I just encourage you? Don't make an internal decision in your life based on the brokenness of another person. Because the truth is we're all called to be reflections of Jesus. But these reflections, you and I, we're broken glass. We're broken windows. And so again, there's going to be some imperfection. There's some distortion there. Because the reality is that you're not supposed to look to other people. You're not even supposed to look to me or you're supposed to look to Jesus as the answer. He's your hope. He's your life. And so, a little side note there. But that leads to the third thing. So we got pain, people that lead to doubt. Here's the third thing is we can think certainty is synonymous with faith. We can think certainty is synonymous with faith. Mark 9:24 says, the Father cries out, I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. Here we see this problem with pain, this problem with people, and now this problem with perspective. Listen, I think this is a challenge for a lot of us here in this room, where we tend to think that if I doubt, I don't have faith. And to have faith somehow means I don't ever doubt. That having faith somehow means I'm 100% sure about everything. In fact, I love this story because again, here he shares this problem and he brings it to Jesus. And again, notice Jesus' response here. Kind of go back to the story. Mark 9:23 he says, Jesus said to him, if I can. It's like, here's my son. I got this problem. I don't know what to do. I want to believe, but help my unbelief. And Jesus is like, if. like if. All things are possible to him who believes. And it's at this point where you almost kind of expect Jesus is going to really kind of lay the hammer down on him. Like, what do you mean? Like, you don't believe? Well, okay. Well, in that case, you need to go back to the end of the line. And when you get some more faith, then come back, and then we'll talk. But what's interesting, that's not what happens here. See, and this is important because I think so much in church, a lot of times we can kind of get stuck on this first part. Like where, Jesus is in there saying, and kind of like this guy comes up to Jesus when he's saying, I do believe. We can kind of land right there where we have firm belief, but we struggle to acknowledge doubt. As here, Jesus, he's kind of preaching this and just kind of set the setting. Yeah, I grew up in, I spent a lot of time in Tulsa and kind of every once in a while we enter into some kind of really like Southern gospel churches. And I don't know if you've ever been in like a Southern gospel church, like the preachers there, like they like interaction. Like they want you to talk back to them, not just like sit there. And so oftentimes when they're really getting into the message, one of the ways that they want you to talk back to you is they always add a ha at the end of things. And so I remember, every once in a while I'd be in there and you'd see these preachers be like, if you only believe, ha, and all things are possible if you believe, ha, and everyone would be like, the ladies would be starting to stand up, they'd get involved, the organ would start going, right? And that's kind of what's going on here. Jesus is like, if you only believe, right? All things are possible. And everyone's like, hey, man, I do believe, I believe, right? And for a lot of us, it stops though, and that's a great proclamation. We sing songs about that. And yes, we believe, but it can't always just stop there. See, we're really good sometimes at affirming belief, but we struggle about acknowledging our unbelief, acknowledging our doubts, acknowledging our struggles. That sometimes I don't have all the answers. Sometimes I don't have it all figured out. And if we're not careful, we can kind of come into church and we can think that to come in, I have to sort of have this suspension of disbelief. I don't know if you've ever heard that term. It's actually a term that started originating in the early 1800s. It was a literacy term, but it actually carried on into the cinema, into movies. And in fact, actually, the definition of suspension of disbelief is this, is that when it comes to stories and movies, it suggests that if a writer could infuse a human interest and a semblance of truth into a fantastic tale, the reader would suspend judgment or disbelief concerning the implausibility of the narrative. Now listen, that works great when it comes to fiction. That works great when it comes to a story. But when it comes to God's word, when it comes to faith, not so much. Because here's the thing, is that uncertainty is not the opposite of faith, it's the prerequisite for faith. Uncertainty is not the opposite of faith, it is the prerequisite for faith. Because truth is, you don't need faith in the presence of certainty. I mean, think about this. At some point in time, all of us are going to pass away from this life. At some point in time, all of us are going to be face to face with God, face to face with our Creator, face to face with Jesus. And how many know in that moment of certainty, in clarity, you're not going to need faith? I mean, when you see Jesus face to face, you will not need faith in that moment when you're in heaven. Now on the flip side of that, here on earth, it's all about faith. I mean, we do need faith. I mean, Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. But get this, things yet seen. In other words, so often we think uncertainty is somehow the enemy of faith, but it's uncertainty that actually provides the necessary context for faith. You have to be uncertain before you can really have faith. The thing that ends faith is not more questions, more concerns, more doubt. The thing that ends faith is certainty. See, get this. Faith is not the absence of doubt, but it's the decision to trust God in the presence of doubt. I remember some years ago, our neighbors started to come into the church that we were pastoring at the time, and his family came in, and they started off, first his wife and his boys, they came, and they loved it, and eventually he came along too, and I remember when he first started, and I remember coming and talk to me, it's like, he goes, hey man, I love the church, I love what's going on, my family really likes it, but you just need to know, I struggle to kind of believe in all this stuff. Like it's kind of great for them, and I want my boys to kind of grow up and learn about God, but for me, I'm struggling to believe. I'm struggling to believe this whole, that there's God out there, that he's got a plan for me, he's got a purpose for me, and so for the next 6 months, I just kind of hung out with them. Once a week, we'd get together, and I remember one of the things I told them right off the bat is like, hey, look, you need to know that you can belong here even before you believe here. You can belong here, and I still believe that today. You can belong here even before you believe. And so I spent the 6 months just kind of mentoring. We talked through some of these questions, and I remember about 6 months into it, we have this conversation, and he's like, he's like, man, I want to believe. I do, but I don't feel like I have enough faith to really, step across that line. And I remember my response to him was, hey, listen, I think you got more faith than you realize. And look, I share that story with you because I think the problem the problem for a lot of us is that he thought faith, again, meant that I have to have complete certainty. Like to believe something, I have to know everything. And have faith means having faith like all the time. Like it's just my life is 24/7 quoting scriptures and singing K-Love. And I don't know why I'm picking on K-Love so much today. But can I just be honest with you again? That's not the prerequisite. For Jesus being able to show up in your life, to walk in faith, that's not the prerequisite. And again, what I love about this story is we see a guy who's like, listen, I got some unbelief. He not just affirms belief, he says, listen, I believe, but he also acknowledges his struggles. He acknowledges his doubts. He acknowledges his issues and circumstances. And again, notice Jesus doesn't rebuke him. He doesn't turn around and just say, back at the end of the line. No, he actually calls him to bring his son and heals his son. So you don't need all faith all the time. You just need some faith. You just need some faith. In fact, the Bible, in fact, Jesus actually even goes one step further. He says you don't even need just some faith, you just need small faith. You need small faith. Matthew 17:20 says, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, nothing will be impossible to you. Nothing will be impossible to you. In fact, Mark chapter 4 unpacks this a little bit more. It says, then he said, to what shall we liken the kingdom of God? It is like a mustard seed, which when it is sown on the ground is smaller than all the other seeds on earth. But when it is sown, it grows up and becomes greater than all herbs and shoots out large branches so that the birds of the air may nest under its shade. Now, just to give you a little perspective of this, I think we actually got a picture of a full-grown mustard seed plant. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's huge. But even more amazing is kind of where it starts. See, a mustard seed, thanks to our friends at Toledo Seed and Feed, this, if I can, oh man, not drop it, this is a mustard seed. Can you see this? Yeah. So, and it's an interesting illustration because it speaks to us really the challenge of faith for a lot of us. Because notice he doesn't mention just the only seeds. It's the smallest seed, but he also brings about these other seeds. And so again, we've got a few extra other seeds here. We got cucumbers, and we got to do a little bit of work here. So we got mustard seed, we got cucumbers, we got peas, we got. Oh man, my mustard seeds are running all over. We got pumpkin, we got corn. I mean, we got a bunch of seeds here. All right, okay. Now, he's saying again, so faith, and here again is the challenge of faith is that in our hand, when we hold on to our faith and you add in these other seeds, again, just out of curiosity, I mean, can you see the faith in that? Can you see the mustard seed? Probably not. No. It's hard to see. Well, and again, he's speaking of this reality of faith and the challenge of faith for a lot of us is that so often, and these other seeds he's talking about here, really what he's speaking of is some of those seeds of like worry, some of those seeds of doubt, some of those seeds of fear. And in the light of those, when you look at your circumstance, when you look at that situation that's creating so much anxiety, creating so much fear, so much worry, listen, how many of you know that in its unsown form, that faith starts off as the smallest seed? Faith by itself, faith in the midst of, I guess, all these other seeds, your worries, it's never going to feel like it's quite enough. Like in the light of your situation, it's never going to feel like it's quite enough. And listen, unfortunately, what a lot of us try to do to kind of, overcome that is we think, well, if I just get more faith, then somehow that'll be sort of, that could solve all of my issues here. So we add some more faith. Can you see the faith in that? It's hard to see, right? Yeah. And you can keep adding, but it's never going to seem like it's quite enough in that unsown form while you're still holding on to it. Or others of us, we think, well, if I can just get rid of it, if I can just figure out all the questions I've got, or if I can just get this stuff, this situation taken care of in my life, if I can, maybe just kind of remove some seeds of my life and sort it all out and organize it, then I'll come to faith. Then I'll make that step. And in fact, this is what's kept some of you even from taking a step into church or taking a step into a relationship with Jesus because you thought that the goal was I had to have it all figured out before I could make that step. I had to know with complete certainty before I could take that step of faith. And yet what I love about this illustration is that notice what Jesus says is really the answer to it. It's not in getting more faith. It's not in somehow organizing and getting a life, all your situation, your circumstance, your questions all figured out and all answered. No, it's about taking the faith you got, no matter how small it is, no matter how small it seems, and sowing the faith that you have, releasing the faith that you have, acting on the faith that you have, no matter how small that faith might seem. See, again, this is what keeps, and the enemy loves to try to use this against, this is what keeps so many of us from ever seeing faith really realizing, growing in our life, and why so many of us we remain kind of stuck in the gap of our doubts and our fears and our worries is because we try holding on to it. We try clinging to it rather than taking a step of faith, no matter how small that step of faith is. For some of you, maybe that step of faith is hey, man, it's taking a step to get involved in serving, getting involved in a ministry, and yet you sit there and you look at the faith in your hand and you're like, I don't have enough. I don't have enough knowledge. I don't have enough faith to actually step out there. But if you just act on the seed of faith you got, on the faith that you have. For some of you, it's like, man, I want to believe that God's going to redeem the situation I'm going through, that He's going to work through the situation I'm going through. I want to worship, but I struggle when I look at my situation. Listen, if you would just act upon the faith that you do have, if you would worship Him even when you don't feel like it, even when you're not seeing how it could work out or what could happen, if you would just act on the faith that you have. Listen, when you do that, what you find in that illustration is an incredible promise. Because notice what he says is that when you act upon that faith, when you take a step of faith, no matter how small it seems, listen, when it's sown, it outgrows all your other doubts. It outgrows all the other seeds. It outgrows all the other worries. It outgrows all the other questions. If you'll just take a step of faith, no matter how small it seems, no matter how insignificant it seems. I put it in my notes this way: as long as you hold on to it, doubt will dominate faith. But when you let it go, faith always overcomes. As long as you hold on to it, doubt will dominate faith. But when you let it go, faith always overcomes. So real quick, two quick things. How do we do this? How do we really sow faith? How do we take that small step? Just a couple quick practical things here. One is simply you got to learn to give your belief and unbelief to God. Give your belief and unbelief to God. Listen, I think most of us, we get that God wants my faith. But what you got to understand is God doesn't just want you to bring your faith. He wants you to bring your doubt too. Your fears too. Your worry too. Your doubts and struggles too. Luke 9:41, he says, they said to the men, bring your son here. Again, the son was the picture, the very picture of all of his hurt and all of his heartache. It was a picture of his hope, but also a lot of his doubts of, God, do you care? God, are you even there? I don't fully understand this. And yet I love Jesus' response there. Jesus says, it doesn't say, hey, listen, you'll come back to me when you've got a little bit more faith, or come back to me once you get this all figured out, and once you get it all sorted out, then I can do something, then I can show up. No, he says, listen, it's just bring your son. Bring your faith and your doubt to me, and I can work in this. I can work in this. And I love it. It's an incredible statement for some of us who, again, are wrestling. When you look at your situation, you look at the promise of God and this gap between your reality. Listen, you need to know that even when you doubt, God can still show up. Even when you doubt and even when you struggle to believe, God can still show up if you have the courage to surrender and to give Him not just your faith, but even your doubts and your fears and your worries. Listen, God can work through that. He can move through that. Which leads to the second and final thing. And I'm going to invite the worship team up on this one. But the second thing is this, is that you got to grow some roots in places that feed your faith. You got to grow some roots in places that feed your faith. When it comes to all those seeds in your life, what are you feeding? And are you in a place, are you taking the time to get yourself in places that will feed that seed of faith? Are you taking time in prayer? Are you taking time to get alone and get into His Word? Are you taking time in church? Are you taking time getting around other faith-filled believers? I think one of the great kind of pictures and great stories of this we see in the Gospels is in John 20. We see the story of a guy known as Doubting Thomas, right? How would you like, by the way, to have that as your nickname? Like, hey, there's Doubting Thomas, right? But there's Thomas, and when we catch up with Thomas in there, is basically Jesus is he's died, he's been crucified, buried, and he's risen again, and he shows up to all the other disciples, and all the disciples but Thomas. Thomas, for whatever reason, is like not there, and so Jesus, resurrected form, shows up to the disciples, and they're excited, they're cheering. They're celebrating. And then Jesus kind of goes away for a time, and Thomas shows up on the scene. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation where, like, you missed, like, the celebration. Like, you missed the amazing moment. Like, you were in the bathroom when they threw the game-winning 2 seconds on the clock, 50-yard game-winning touchdown, right? And that's kind of where Thomas is at. You know, Thomas comes back and the disciples are talking about how amazing Jesus is. You wouldn't believe it. Jesus is back. You know, he's risen from the grave. And Thomas is like, man, okay, that's great. And you can almost see the frustration building in Thomas, like, enough already. I get it. I missed it. And he goes on to take it one step further. He's like, listen, I won't believe until I touch the scars on his hands and I feel the scar on his side. But look, I share this because here's the amazing thing, is that after he says that, doubting Thomas chooses for the next 8 days to actually stay in community with all these fellow believers. Like he didn't just like give up and just kind of go on his way. No, he purposely made sure he was planted in a community of people of faith, people who could encourage him, people who could lift him up. And it's amazing when you read the story, it says in John 20, 8 days later, Jesus would show up. And what's amazing, again, he's already showed up to the disciples. But he would come back and show himself for the one person. Show himself to Thomas, which I love that. That he would go out of his way